So I spent some time this weekend with our clergy and lay delegates to diocesan convention. We were over at Riverside at our convention, and there was so much to celebrate. Many new initiatives for congregational vitality and ministries that are just blooming across the diocese. And of course, we elected a bishop. So I learned something about discernment this weekend, and I learned it not at prayer and not in worship, but of all places at the breakfast buffet at the hotel. So for 4 years, I've stayed at this same hotel, the Marriott at the Convention Center in Riverside, and I'd always assumed that I shouldn't spend any extra money on breakfast because it can be pricey, to get breakfast at a hotel. So I just would bring, some oranges and toast and go that direction. But only yesterday morning, I explored a little bit and noticed that actually a very lovely breakfast buffet has been available to me all along, and I feasted sumptuously yesterday morning, and I'd been missing out because I just didn't explore and look hard enough. And it was a small but vivid reminder that abundance, that what we need is often right before us, if only we take the time to pause, to explore a little bit, and notice. In our church life, and especially in moments of discernment, whether we're choosing a bishop, or in our case, a rector, or in my case, looking at what's next, it's easy to begin with our own assumptions and own opinions and miss what's right in front of us. Leaning on what I think is needed, who I think is best, or the outcome that I want, rather than maybe what we see and what we know, and collectively what we want. Christian discernment calls us to a deeper kind of inquiry. It invites us to set aside our habits of individualism that reinforce our assumptions and instead ask of one another, of people maybe outside our normal bubble, what do you think? What do you experience as the church's need, the community's needs? Where is God already providing abundance that we can see if we work together with some curiosity? So throughout the process of discerning a bishop for the Diocese of Los Angeles, I found myself checking my own assumptions and my own wants and anxieties, and reached out to colleagues and laity for perspective. What are you hearing? What do you know about this diocese that I don't? And listening carefully to the Spirit speaking through others. Genuine discernment isn't about persuading or politicking someone to share my opinion or your opinion. It's about curiosity and openness and trust, finding out what we think together, which means listening carefully, usually listening a whole lot more than speaking, right? And there's a real difference between manipulation and just talking with a hoped-for outcome, and holy conversation, holy listening. One shuts people down. It closes off relationships. It shuts down growth and possibility. The other opens up hearts. It deepens relationships. And when you find someone whose mind is set on a different path than yours, or who's experiencing something very differently, holy conversation is not our opportunity to change them, but to understand more deeply. This applies across all kinds of aspects of our lives, at our dinner table, in our civic world, and here in our church. You might not like what you hear. It's entirely possible you won't like what you hear, but you will deepen relationship and understanding. Likely, if you listen long enough, you will bear witness to someone's fears or pain or anxieties and worries and their deep, deep hunger. And that's where you usually are going to find God and the Holy Spirit and probably a lot of congruence with your own experience. Discernment, like that breakfast buffet, is an act of noticing and realizing that God's abundance and wisdom are already here among us. If we take the time to look and listen and share that feast together. So we did that writ large as we discerned the next bishop, and we elected the Reverend Dr. Antonio Gallardo. Does anybody here know him? Anybody had dinner with him? Hung out with Bishop-elect Gallardo? I didn't think so. Are you curious? Are you curious about who this person is? Okay, good. All right, well, let's talk about him for a second. He was born and raised in, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Barquisimeto in Venezuela. And he was the youngest of 7 kids. Now, that sibling placement alone makes him qualified to be a bishop, quite frankly. He was trained as an engineer and then later earned a master's and PhD in business and economics. And then, if being an engineer and economist wasn't enough, he then started to study theology and got another master's degree from Claremont School of Theology, Master's of Divinity, and then did some further study at our own Bloy House here in LA. He has been rector of St. Luke's San Lucas in Long Beach, where he's done an amazing work around multicultural ministry and connecting with the great needs around that church, and really has a thriving ministry of helping unhoused and hungry and connecting with the mission of Matthew 25. He's former vicar of St. Luke's in the mountains in La Creciento, and prior to that, he was pastor for Latino ministries at All Saints in Pasadena. That's kind of a lot. He was elected on November 8th, on the 8th ballot, as the 8th bishop. That's kind of fun. And he got 2/3, according to the canons, he got 2/3 of both the laity and the clergy vote, which I love that we really had to work hard, but we got there, and it felt right when we did. Pending the consents, there's a whole consent process around the wider church, but he'll be consecrated on July 11th in 2026. So he's the first Latino bishop in the Diocese of Los Angeles, the first Latino diocesan bishop in this diocese. And his ministry truly is multicultural and extends beyond the walls of the church. He's a bridge builder and a community connector, and he is a global person. He sees the world in a big way. With a background in engineering, economics, and theology, he has so many different gifts to bring to this ministry, and he understands something about the spiritual and actual economy of the church. Now, I'm seeing you nod a little bit. Yes, what he does is relevant to our ministry here. You've seen the connections that I'm seeing, some of the deep longings that, that we have here at All Saints and our hopes. I'm really curious how that's going to match up with his ministry. And I'm eager to set some of that in motion for us. So at the end of the voting and all of the worry and the praying and the excitement and the letting go, he came and greeted us as bishop-elect, sincerely and humbly, with obvious, genuine love for the church and for us. And he said that he wants his ministry to be Christ-centered. Now, you'd think that would be obvious and would go without saying, right? But honestly, once you dig into the ministry of the episcopate, it's really easy to get knocked off center. There are so many things that press upon you from before and from behind, and it is really, it's important to say that we want to be Christ-centered. I mean, you see that in your own life, don't you? You go to work and you think, oh, I'm going to have a Christ-centered day, and then how long does it take before it just gets knocked off center? But he said this, Bishop-elect Gallardo said, "Let us make Christ our heart, our hope, our identity, our purpose. Make of him our anchor." That's a beautiful call to ministry, isn't it? He's calling us to live a resurrection life. You're going to wonder where I was going to get to the gospel. Here we go. That call of discernment and landing a life centered in resurrection is exactly what Jesus is describing today in the Gospel of Luke. It's what he's doing as the powers that be are trying to knock him off center. He's in the middle of a full-blown ambush, right? He's teaching in the temple, the spiritual, political, and economic heart of Israel. And he's walking the way of the cross. In this point in the gospel, he has turned his face to the cross, towards betrayal and death. And he's teaching, it's a public setting in full view of the crowds, and everyone in power is kind of circling, waiting for him to slip up so they can go on the attack. The Pharisees have tried, the scribes have tried, and this morning the Sadducees are trying. So this is a priestly elite. They only trust the 5 books of Moses. They are practical and scholarly. They don't favor angels or spirits, do not believe in the resurrection. When you die, that's it. You kind of go to the shadowy place of Sheol, but your name lives on only through your descendants and your land as your legacy. It's very concrete, very practical, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. However, what they do is they're trying to trap Jesus up, and they tell a story to make the resurrection sound ridiculous, to make this life that Jesus is describing just like a farce. And they go through all of the 7 marriages, the no children, and then set up this scenario in heaven. So who's she really married to? And it's not a real question. They're not really asking about marriage. This has nothing to do with marriage. It's an attempt to make resurrection seem ridiculous and Jesus' teaching seem foolish, and to get laughter around him. They're kind of making fun of him. And Jesus refuses the bait, refuses the premise, and he says, you're imagining a world that is organized around death. It's organized around the finite. A world where marriage and lineage is about survival and preserving your name against the grave, basically. But in the resurrection, life is not preserved, it is transformed. And that's the subtle distinction he's making. Resurrection is not just the preservation of our worldly orders relocated in a nicer place. It's transformation. We are children of God, living fully in God's presence now, and always, transcending earthly needs and wants and structures. And then Jesus goes deeper. He really lays it out for them. He goes to the very scriptures that they trust the most and reminds them way back when God spoke to Moses at the bush, God says what? At that burning bush, the bush was burning but not consumed, and God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not past tense, I am eternally this God, and I'm that God right now for you. And Jesus says this line that turns everything up on its head. God is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to God all are alive. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not dead, but they're alive in the love of God, in the presence of God. Jesus isn't describing some layout or architecture of heaven. He's revealing the nature of God, that resurrection is not something that God does to you when you die. Resurrection is who God is. God's very nature is life-giving, life-restoring, life-holding. The New Testament theologian N.T. Wright says that when God names the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he's not offering proof of immortality. He's naming God's covenantal fidelity. He's not describing the condition of the patriarchs. He's talking about the nature of God and the covenant. And God continues to hold them in life because of this covenant. Rowan Williams writes, resurrection is what the faithfulness of God looks like. Now, isn't that a different take on resurrection? That it's more about God's fidelity than what we have done or what we're going to be lifted to? It's not speculation, it's trust. God's love is stronger than death. So death can't break that relationship with God. Our lives now and beyond death are held by the one who is eternally living. When we say that God is a God of the living, we're proclaiming that God's story is life, God's language is life, and wherever love is renewed and mercy breaks in, resurrection is already happening. And why does that matter? It matters because the world we live in right now behaves much like the Sadducees are describing. It is defined with limits and scarcity and control, and you must do this or this or this. And there's not enough to go around. And so we have to cling to the narrow definitions of what is true or what we have, and we're scared to give away. And we preserve ourselves by clinging to certainty, which makes it really hard to be open to discernment, change, and wisdom of the community. And even the church can forget, and we manage our lives as if loss is the other option to generosity. But Jesus invites us to inhabit a very different world, a world where love is never wasted, where hope is not foolish, and where grief becomes part of living with a God who never lets us go. So if God is the God of the living, then every time we risk giving more than we can, loving more than we should, and even knowing that loss will hurt and our hearts are going to be broken, we are already living the resurrected life. When we stand at the grave and remember our loved ones, we are not broken. They are not gone, but we proclaim Alleluia at that grave, and remember they are held in the loving hands and the life of God. That is a resurrection life. That is resurrection faith. When we forgive over and over again, more than we should and more than is practical, and certainly more than we want to, when we choose compassion over cynicism, and we do not let the world tell us there's a scarcity, that we practice generosity, and we feed the hungry, and we help those in need around us. When we do that in the face of a world that says, hang on, shut down, there's not enough. We live this truth that Jesus reveals, that life in God does not end. Life in God has no limits. Life in God is fruitful. So this is the pastoral heart of it, that nothing given in love is ever lost or wasted. God gathers it and transforms it and breathes life into all. Resurrection shapes how we live right now, not what's going to happen later. We stand in the presence of the God whose love spans the living and the dead, the communion of saints, where those we love and we ourselves remain held in divine life. So again, as Bishop-elect Gallardo said yesterday, let us make Christ our heart, our hope, our identity, and our purpose. Make of him an anchor. And in that spirit, we know here and now that we are people who belong to the living God generously, courageously, joyfully, because the one who names us, calls us, and loves us, and always will be, is the God of the living. Amen.